years. So thanks everybody for coming, and also us from Winnipeg, and Tasha and Ian and Brayden and Carolyn. First thing I'll do is thank Carolyn for, this has been a lot of work, so thank you, Carolyn. Hot for that one. And it's also my mom's birthday. So as I was talking about at the bench, it was really illuminating for Cam and Pauline and Carol and I to be at the union yesterday. You really got a sense, because you have these sort of two different lenses for Dave, and it was neat to see the lenses of Dave from his co-workers and the people that he mentored and provided leadership and advocacy for over the years. And so that was what we'll say is a button-down version of the speech. Today, we all know Dave quite well, so today will be the not buttoned-down version of the speech about Dave and talking about Dave. So, and just as far as format, we'll do this. We'll have dinner, and sort of when coffee and dessert are being served afterwards, if people want to come up and say a comment, or I know you two have to leave earlier, provide a comment, that would be welcome. So I think what I'd like to do is get into a bit of a history, about Dave, and as I've said, what sort of his causes and focuses were. But a lot of you really don't know sort of a lot of the background on Dave, but so Dave was born in 1961 in Alliston, Ontario. So Alliston is where Camp Borden was, which is where our father was flying, Glenn. So he was flying then, he was a pilot for the RCAF. They then had to move to the Greenboro, Nova Scotia. Parents correctly here, Greenboro, Nova Scotia, and my father, was really kind to inform me that's where I was made. Thanks, Glenn. And then back in the day for the RCAF, my father was a pilot. It was literally like a NHL hockey draft for when the airlines really around the world would come calling for pilots. So I don't know if Glenn went in the 6th overall or 8th overall, but he went to United Airlines in the States. So I was actually born while he was in a training in Colorado Springs, and we were living down in Santa Ana. And then in, I guess, about 1966, we moved to just outside of Chicago in Crystal Lake, Illinois. And those are some of the pictures that you've seen there. I was living in Crystal Lake, Illinois from 66 to 71. And then Glenn, who's an interesting and complex individual, he and my mom parted company. My mom's from Winnipeg, so we moved back to Winnipeg. That's where the family was. And our Uncle Bob were there. So that was Winnipeg for the years. And then what you may not know about Dave is he actually never finished high school. So he didn't quite get through that gate. And he went down to the States and proceeded to, we actually don't know what he was up to down in the States for a couple of years. And then he came back to live with Glenn and Edith and a 6-month-old Violet in Edmonton. And Stephen and I were texting this week, or it might have been last week, but he goes, Edith just so nicely puts it, well then, it didn't take long, and then Glenn and David just stopped seeing eye to eye on things. Which is a very common theme for both Glenn and David. So I think Anita said today that literally last time she saw David was when he went on the bus. So the stubbornness, Dave's stubbornness definitely showed through. Dave and Heather were married July 20th, 1985. July 20th, 1985. And Kendra was born September 30th of the same year. And again, Dave would have sort of become being Dave, and so Heather and Kendra moved back to Sydney, Nova Scotia, and Dave found his way, found his path, and his path really was working with the union. So where we were at Edmonton was the asbestos and pipe fitter union 110. I'm getting that wrong, and I apologize. So we were there. So that's where he found his way. So we joined the union officially in 1989, and that allowed him the opportunity to move to Sydney and spend some very quality years with Kendra, and he worked in Hibernia during that period of time. What happened during that period of time is that there was in Sydney this part of the lagoon called the tar ponds, and the tar ponds were like one of Canada's worst toxic sites And David started getting involved in the advocacy in order to get the tar ponds cleaned up, and it eventually was cleaned up at considerable cost, and I guess it's now a park in Sydney. So I spoke with Rick. So what happened is this brought him to the attention of the policymakers in Ottawa. So he ended up going to Ottawa in the fall of would have been 1997 that he went there, and I spoke with Rick Liberty, who was the person who hired him. I managed to speak to him today, and what he said is, we went there, he said, one of my aides said that there's this really important, and Rick was the NDP Environment and Parks critic. So he went and said, there's things happening in Nova Scotia, I really think you should get there. And Dave was the person who was doing the advocacy. So Rick met Dave and he said, we just hit it off immediately. It's like two paths that were destined to be together. And he just said Dave had the spirit for work that needed to be done. And that led to the Canadian version of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is Mr. Campbell Goes to Ottawa. So Dave worked as a research and an assistant for Rick, and he stayed in Ottawa until 2004. And what Dave did at that point in time is continue to develop his advocacy skills, his ability to network incredibly well, and he was a very tireless worker, very prolific emailer, as many of us know full well. Busy, wink, 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 busy. So he was very prolific with that. But then he came to Banff, and this really became his home here, being in Banff and in the mountains. He really was a kindred spirit with the mountains, and he was able to continue on working for Peter Poole, Peter, who was at the bench today, but passes on regrets for being busy with. He's made the interesting decision to run for successfully council in Banff. So I'm sure it'll be careful what you wish for, Peter. But he has a strong belief in a strong civic and very many causes. So he brought Dave in to do research for him at the UTSB under the Sleeping Bear. So he did that for quite a number of years, and then never ever was not engaged in issues that were important to him. I have a couple of excerpts to read from you on that, and one's from Bill and with his union work I'll continue on the path. Then at some point in time he realized, well, I still have my trade ticket, and I need to get enough hours in to get my pension. So then he went back and said, I have the trade. So he would work up in Great Slave and Fort Mac and all these other very remote, cold places. And you'll see some pictures in the slideshow we put together about his time there. And then he finished up in Banff around 2014 and was living up in Gibbons with his friends Bill and Carol McKay, who we met. Were very, very nice people, and Pauline and Cam met them last night. And then he was in Edmonton at the time of his passing. So, but here's a note that was sent by Bill Spring, from who was the former business manager of the Insulator Unit. So Dave was an unpaid advocate for workers who spent a lot of time behind the scenes researching and lobbying to improve working conditions for workers while I was the business manager of the Insulator Union for many years. He would often call me to compare notes and discuss his thoughts about this and that. We didn't always agree on things, but I always respected his opinions, and he was likewise respectful. At a union meeting not long before his passing, he weighed in with some well-thought-out comments and a suggestion about a matter that influenced the decision made. That's the Dave I'll remember most. And from Jim, who's present here, sent a nice email out saying, I've been involved in public policy and advocacy for more than 40 years and found Dave to be a rare and most welcome colleague. He understood that politics and policy were about far more than the facts and figures on any issue. He knew what buttons to push and when and why. He was responded to the personal and value-driven nature of the business in a way that few of our colleagues will ever understand. Dave opened my eyes to the value, to these critical dimensions of policy advocacy, and I value all that I learned from him. So thanks for that note, Jim. So that really is the history of Dave that brought him here and helped really influence those three pillars about work, the union and workplace, and our environment and our relations with Aboriginal people. But we are here as a celebration of life, and with that we have to also look at the Dave that we know, and you know, love is the word because it's Dave, but his single, and this is a trait that he very much shared with his father, our father, was a single-minded focus on an issue, and as a result of that, the ability to balance other important areas. Kendra, life ends up falling off. Which is really difficult, but again, it's very, very typical of both Glenn and Dave with that. Very great contributions to what they did, but it came at a cost, unfortunately. He was stubborn. He had a hard life. A lot of that was brought on by himself. Interested in tally the couch surfing that he has been in for all these years. What we thought, and Carol and I talked about this, is what would really capture David was his last trip to Winnipeg was like a microcosm of David for this five-day trip. Now, again, you know Dave. Dave's fine. We love Dave. But at the end of the 5 days, Carolyn looked at me and said, that 5-day trip was about 4 days too many. But it was a microcosm of his life. So he gets there, and he's there for a convention. So it's the Federation of Municipalities. I couldn't tell the story yesterday because the union sent him there. So he's at this convention for the Federation of Municipalities. So first day he went downtown to not go to the convention, to go to the Aboriginal People's Television Network, where he did a lot of work with See Their New Studio. So that was day one. And day two, well, he's having trouble with his TELUS phone in Winnipeg. And there's a legitimate issue that if you have your TELUS phone in Winnipeg, they have to jump on the MTS band and it doesn't work, so this is a legitimate issue. But Dave spent the entire day stewing about it and just being in a grumpy mood, and I just TELUS and just all this. And I looked at Dave and I go, Dave, go to the TELUS store. And he goes, thinks about it. I'll do that tomorrow. So he eventually goes to the TELUS store. Day three, he goes, like, Don, like, why are you going back? Why are you working today? I go, Dave, you said you were here for a convention. That means that, that means your days are tied up, right? So day 4 is Tash's birthday party. So we go over to Tash and Ian and Braden's house. And it was a fantastic visit. Ian's father, long time, very involved, and one of the people responsible for maintaining the experimental lakes in I guess it's Ontario. It was Ontario. So they had a very, very good conversation. And Dave was absolutely in his element, because Dave is just such a masterful storyteller. He's a true raconteur, and by having someone else in the environmental cause in that evening, he was just absolutely in his element, and just being able to tell the stories. And Dave would always like to drop some names and some events and things that had been worked upon, because he did a lot of very, very good work. Then on the ride home, a very interesting dilemma presented itself. So on the ride home, and their place is about a half hour from our place, which is, and we're driving home in the perimeter. As soon as we get in the car, Dave goes, I shouldn't have had that Havarti. I go, what are you talking about, Havarti? The Havarti goes right through my system. How long is it till we need to get home? I think I'm going to have an accident. So when you're presented with this information, it really gives you quite the quandary. The quandary is, do I drive fast or do I drive slow?
So what did you do?
We got him back just in time. So that was, but it was, again, it was a very, very good visit. And the final note that I'll add is this, is that it is very sad and unfortunate he passed away. He really would have had a fantastic next chapter of his life to write. Just with relationships, with his work, with his causes, with the union work, and being able to be, retire in this, I mean, it's beautiful. But we do know one thing, or two things, that are certain. That Dave died a happy man, because the NDP is in government in Alberta, and the Cubs are world champions. So everybody, raise your glass. Cheers to Dave.
Dave.
And again, would like to just thank Carolyn for all the work she's done on all this, and everyone for coming. And now we'll hit it. Thanks.